Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big warm welcome to the president of the University of Cincinnati, Mr. Santaono.
Thank you very much. It's really fantastic to see all of you here. Many familiar faces, and it's wonderful that you're here to support such an important cause that touches all of our lives. And what an amazing story! I got to get that book, and I can't wait for the movie to come out. But it's just absolutely fantastic what you've done. And the courage that you've demonstrated by writing the book, but also talking about your story, is exactly what we need to do as a society to really battle this mental health issue. 1 in 5 means that 1 in 5 teens and adults live with a mental health condition. And when you think about it, that means that anytime we have 5 people together, chances are that at least one of you has been affected by a mental health issue. And when you actually consider families, that means that almost every family is affected by a mental health issue. The mental health issues in our world can range from mild to chronic depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, anxiety, PTSD, and of course suicide. And all of these people, these affected people, are real people. They're not numbers. They're people that I see at the University of Cincinnati and that people see at every high school and university around the world. They're individuals with God-given talents. And I'll tell you, some of these students with mental health issues are the most amazing people that you will ever meet. And when our society does not provide the help and services that they need, our society is missing out on amazing young individuals with those gifts. I want to talk a little bit about my own family. You know, when I was talking about what I might be able to say at this event, individuals said that perhaps the most powerful thing would be to talk a little bit about my own family, of which I'm incredibly proud. But hopefully by talking about my own family, it'll really be an example that mental health issues affect all families. I'm incredibly proud of my family. Many of you know that we come from an immigrant family. My parents came to this country with everything in one suitcase, and they wanted the best for us. You probably heard this term, tiger parents. If you go to CCM or you go to schools, you'll see that, or you go to the library, you'll see a lot of Asian kids studying really hard, going to CCM on weekends, trying to learn how to play violin and things like that. I was one of those kids. All 3 of the boys in our family were one of those kids. We grew up actually in Baltimore, Maryland. And the CCM of Baltimore, Maryland is a conservatory called the Peabody Conservatory of Music, one of the great conservatories. And none of this is a criticism of my parents, who I love dearly. All they wanted was for their 3 boys that had come to a strange country that they really weren't really familiar with to do well so that they could succeed. And so that's why a lot of those parents really encourage their kids to study hard, do well, go to college, learn how to play a musical instrument, because that, in many cases, can help in getting those kids into college. So all of that is out of love. None of this is a criticism. But one of the consequences of that kind of pressure to do well in school, to excel in extracurricular activities, is that it puts tremendous stress on the kids, and that's something that was true in our family. I have a younger brother. If you go to I think Marymount Theater, there's a movie there right now. I hope you go see it. I'm really proud of it because my brother was associate producer of a film called The Man Who Knew Infinity. It's a story about a great Indian mathematician called Ramanujan. If any of you are interested in mathematics, you will have heard of him, one of the most brilliant mathematicians of the past 2 centuries. And my brother was associate producer of the movie not because that's his vocation, far from that. It's because he, in his own right, is a brilliant mathematician, now a professor of mathematics at Emory University. And he actually followed my father's footsteps. You see, my father came to this country after the war because Robert Oppenheimer, one of the heads of the Manhattan Project, after the war, wanted to do something for the young Japanese people who were left in the country, a country that had been destroyed. And he asked a great mathematician, because he was a nuclear physicist, to look for great young Japanese mathematicians, and they found 5. And one of them was my father, a budding young mathematician in Tokyo. And what they decided to do is Robert Oppenheimer actually stepped down from the Manhattan Project, and he became director of the mecca of physics and mathematics around the world, a place called the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study, and invited about 5 young Japanese mathematicians to come, all expenses paid, to spend time at the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study. And that's why we're in this country. My father had 2 loves, mathematics and music, and so that's why we were these kids going to Peabody Conservatory of Music. My older brother is a pianist, he still plays. My younger brother was a violinist, he doesn't play anymore. He never wanted to play the violin, but he was doing it because his parents said he should, because they wanted him to get into college. And he ended up, so my father's 2 loves, music and mathematics. My brother ended up being a pianist, one of my loves of my father. And my younger brother became a mathematician, following in the footsteps of my father. And this is where the story begins. So with no negative reasons, actually through love, my parents put tremendous pressure on kids. And this is something that actually happens in all kinds of families. The reason why there's a lot of mental illness and health issues in young teens and individuals in college is because of the stress that induces some of these manifestations. Sometimes there's an underlying biological reason, but sometimes it's just the stress of being a teenager or being a college student. So what happened with my brilliant brother, and the ending of the story is a very positive one, is that he was an incredibly bright student, but my father always wanted him to do better, to do more. He wasn't good enough, even though he was a brilliant young mathematician. And he wrote a book that was actually released at the same time as the movie that's actually at Marymount Theater. The movie, once again, is The Man Who Knew Infinity. My brother actually wrote a book that's been published in Springer and has been written about in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. If you're interested in it, there's a lot on the internet about the book. It's a book that was called, and my brother's name is Ken Ono, and the book is really about his life in parallel to Ramanujan's life. And he reveals for the first time in that book something I didn't know until recently, until he sent me a draft of the book, that although he graduated from the University of Chicago, he got a PhD at UCLA, that he was bouncing around as an adjunct professor at University of Illinois, Penn State, things like this. And he had this iconic father, my father, who had been invited to teach at Princeton and then eventually at University of Pennsylvania and then Johns Hopkins. And he felt he couldn't measure up to this iconic father. And so what he did was, before he got married, he had his first child, and he felt that he would never measure up to my dad. And so one rainy day, when he was really, really down, if you read the book, and I didn't know this until recently, he was there on a highway, and he almost veered his car from the lane he was in to the other lane to be killed by an 18-wheeler. He came that close. If you read the book, it's pretty scary. And something stopped him, and he veered off on the side of the highway. Thank God he's alive today. The good story is that he eventually did solve an amazing proof, and he's become tenured at Emory and all those things. But what courage. I'm so incredibly proud of my little brother to be able to talk about what almost pushed him to the brink where he took his own life. So that's one story about how mental illness can really affect a family, my own family. And we all have to be comfortable speaking about these things, and I figured I'd talk about me as well. Because I also grew up in that family, and now in retrospect we completely understand what was happening. Our parents really just wanted us to succeed, so none of this is a criticism of them at all. And it might resonate with some of you. Some of you are parents of kids that took their own lives. don't feel guilty. You know, a lot of the stress that the students feel, it's not your fault. Often it's because you love them. But it's really important for us to speak about this so that we can be there for each other, so that kids can actually have suicide pacts, so they can be there for each other. Sometimes kids that kill themselves have the most loving parents that anyone could ask for, but they don't realize it because they can't relate to their parents. And that's why it's really important to have peers that care for you and look out for you. So let me tell you a little about me. The feelings of inadequacy were not just my little brothers. They were mine as well. And the reason why I'm talking about this for the first time is hopefully in me speaking about this, that it'll make it okay for the rest of you to talk about it and for students in high schools and in colleges, because the story is also about me. In contrast to my younger brother who tried to kill himself, probably around the age of 27, the first time I tried to kill myself was at the age of 14. And you see, my story was just a variation of the theme of my brother's. My little brother didn't feel that he would actually live up to being the kind of mathematician that my father was. Ultimately, he did. And my older brother, by that time, was a prodigy. He had played with the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, played with the Baltimore Symphony, studied at Peabody and then Juilliard and Curtis. And he was the golden child of the family. So that was the older brother I had to live up to. And then my little brother was coming up behind as a math prodigy. And my father used to go around telling his friends, my little son is a genius. You know, he already understands that there is infinity because he asked at the age of 6, there can be no last number because you can always add 1. And my father was really, really proud, said, my younger son is going to be a great mathematician. And he was right. It happened. And then there was this middle son, Santa Ono, who was no good at music. I try my best still, but I don't measure up to my older brother. And I certainly was really bad at mathematics. You see, around that time, I actually got a C in middle school mathematics, which is very embarrassing for a math professor at Johns Hopkins University. That's where we were living at that time. My mother actually had to shamefully take summer school with me to make sure I did okay. But I got to tell you, I was really, really, at a very young age, really, really down because I had these 2 amazing brothers. And in the book that my younger brother writes, he says, Santa Ono was the black sheep of the family. And I was, absolutely. And I got really, really down. I really was very, very down. And so the time I tried to kill myself at the age of 14, this is the way it went. I never actually had any beer or any alcohol or anything like that. So one day I was so down that I took a bottle of beer. It wasn't very smart. A bottle of beer. That's not enough to kill you. And a whole bottle of cold medicine called Chlorocidin. And as you probably know, at the age of 14, I've changed a little bit, but back then I was very, very, very thin, probably not even 100 pounds. And I put a brick behind my bedroom door. I wrote my note. I drank that beer, and I put a whole mouthful of cold medicine in my mouth. I didn't wake up for a long time. My parents really didn't notice. I was really groggy in the morning. Actually, probably was in the afternoon. But that was the first time that I tried to kill myself. I didn't know what I was doing. It was the first time I tried to kill myself. It's a good thing I didn't know what I was doing because it could have easily been the end of my life at the age of 14. So the second time actually, and the reason why I'm going to tell you about the second time I tried to kill myself is that this is something that doesn't just afflict teens and college students. It's something that young adults and older adults are also in danger of. We've got to love not only the teenagers and the college students, we definitely have to do that, but we have to love all of the members of the community, no matter what age they are. The second time that I tried to kill myself was more like what my younger brother went through. I had graduated also from the University of Chicago. I went to get my PhD from McGill University. But I also didn't feel that it was good enough. In retrospect, it's crazy. It was more than good enough. But the fact that you can do those things, you can get a PhD from schools like that and still feel like you're inadequate, just shows you how fragile all of our egos are, and how fragile the balance between being in good mental health and being in weak mental health, how fragile that line is. Believe me, don't any of you feel I'm doing well and feel that it might not happen to you. It could happen to anyone if there's a stressful situation, whether or not you have a predisposition. So the second time I tried to kill myself was when I was around the age of 29 or 30. At that time, I was an assistant professor of medicine at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. I was hoping that was good enough for my parents to be proud of me, but I wasn't really sure, even at that age. And it's really hard to be a professor at a medical school like that. Standards are really high, and it's what you call a soft money institution, where you actually don't get a salary. The dean gives you a room, a laboratory, and says, raise the money to pay your own salary and the people in your lab, and raise the money to buy the equipment so you can do your research. And so that's pretty rough. And I was also at the same university that my father was teaching, Johns Hopkins University. And I'll tell you, the first year, I wasn't sure I was going to get an NIH grant. It's really hard to do that. And the one time that I was at the age of 30 about to kill myself was when I tried to get that NIH grant. First time I didn't get it. The second time I didn't get it. And I figured I was really going to become this inadequate person. The black sheep of the family was really going to be revealed as being inadequate. So the second time, I knew more about what I was doing. And I knew it was just not going to be one beer and some Coricidin. I was a little bit more sophisticated in what I tried to do. Thank God I had some friends who caught me in time. I was hospitalized. And ultimately, although my colleagues at Hopkins didn't know it, I had to go to this mental health hospital, which was affiliated with Johns Hopkins, a very famous one called the Sheppard Pratt Hospital. Went through a lot of counseling. I was put on medication. And the good news is I got out of it. And I eventually ended up getting that grant, becoming a full professor, and ultimately even becoming president of the University of Cincinnati. So that's the other side of the story. Like you said, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And hopefully the other side of the story is, thank goodness I had that friend there that didn't judge me because I was down. That friend, you can be that friend for somebody. You can catch that person before it's too late. God bless you for being here today, because it means you get it. It could be the person to your right or your left that 1 year from now, something catastrophic happens. They lose a child. They get divorced. Life goes downhill. It's not strange. It's part of every family's life. And hopefully today, with your support of this great event, and hopefully with kindness that will emanate from this tent and throughout this community, throughout this great state, we will start to make progress so that we create a web of support for each other, so that somebody will catch one of you that might be down around the corner. You know, as president of the University of Cincinnati, we have now 44,700 students. You can do the math. 1 in 5 of them are struggling. It's not unusual. You know, at the University of Cincinnati, dozens of college students attempt suicide every year. It's not unusual. You know the stories about Cornell University, MIT. The incidence of suicide attempts at those prestigious universities with tremendous stress are even higher than what we deal with at the University of Cincinnati. The answer is not to look the other way and pretend it doesn't happen. The answer is what's happening here today, to talk about it, to realize that all of us go through these sorts of things and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You know, the stigma that's associated with suicide attempts and mental illness is unlike any other. It's almost as if people feel that if they talk about it, that it'll make the matter worse. And as you said, it's diametrically opposed. The more we talk about it, the more we realize that this can affect any of us, then we've made a step forward. That's why today is really special. Now, some of you may realize that certain ethnic groups are more susceptible to the stresses of life and much more likely to try to end their own lives. We've studied this. As an administrator at University of Michigan, my former mentor, the current president of the Carnegie Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, Earl Lewis, studied the very high incidence of suicide attempts among Korean women. And there's a reason for that. You see, in that culture, especially among women, even though they're down, maybe because they get a B in a course, they go back to their room and they don't talk to anyone because there's a stigma associated, because they are afraid and ashamed to ask for help. And so we all have to look at those people that may seem like they're perfectly fine, or maybe those individuals, those groups that seem isolated, and take that extra effort to reach into those groups and do something about it. You know, my former mentor, Earl Lewis, when he was provost of the University of Michigan, actually had an entire initiative in that university to try to figure out how to deal with high-risk groups of students in that university. And it's something that I extended when I was at Emory, and it's something that is a passion of mine. That's why I'm here today. Because the students at University of Cincinnati and Emory in Michigan are incredibly brilliant. They are gifts to society. And whatever we can do, and you're doing it today by supporting this, whatever we can do to expand support in our high schools and colleges is rescuing a miracle, a young person with tremendous gifts that can, if supported, move beyond that and contribute to society. That's why tonight's event is even more important, because breaking the silence and taking a courageous stand, as you all are doing, is the way forward. I'm incredibly proud of my students at the University of Cincinnati. I want to tell you about one thing, and I'm going to wrap it up. We have two Andrews that were president and vice president of the student government. One is called Andrew Knabb, and the other is called Andrew Griggs. And by the way, Andrew Griggs is going to Stanford Business School and getting his MBA there. Wonderful person. But he saw too much pain around him in the student government, among the leaders, among those who weren't leaders. No one is immune from the stresses that actually can result in suicide attempts. And so what they did is they worked with us. And we now have every semester, every single student gets 5 free mental health counseling sessions as part of what we do routinely. And we need to do that in every university and every high school. The ability to pay cannot be a barrier so that a student does not have the help and support that they need. There's so many things that we need. And one last thing I want to say is that although I've been speaking about high school students and college students, this is a growing problem. You know, as big a problem as this right now, the New York Times article said it's surged to a 30-year high. That article, based on a study of the National Center for Health Statistics, reports that the gap in suicide rates between men and women has grown narrower in the past 30 years. Men are still more likely to take their own lives at a rate 3.6 times higher than women. And while the suicide rates for older adults fell over the 30-year period, men over 75 still have, over the age of 75, still have the highest rate of suicide of any age group. This is not a problem just of high school students and college students. And it is the number 7 cause of death among all men in the United States. So what can we do about it? Number 1, what we're doing here today, break the silence. There are some people that have a mental illness. There are others that have just gone through a tremendous crisis, just like all of us will if it hasn't happened already. And we need to break the silence. Number 2, as you are doing, We need to advocate for better services in our schools, in our communities, across the nation. Mental health institutions were closed decades ago, so there's a real deficit in support for individuals that are going through stressful situations or have mental illness. We have to advocate to our state senators, to our representatives, to our U.S. senators and congressmen, and to the federal government in general for a mental health care system with true equal coverage from health insurance for patient services. Number 4, we need to fight for more funding for research from the National Institutes of Mental Health and the NIH into the causes of mental illness and to find better treatments so that our great faculty and physicians, for example, at the UC Neuroscience Center, can be part of the cure for individuals in the future. The medications that exist today have too many side effects, and in some cases they exacerbate the disease. We need more fundamental research so that we can attack this problem that affects 1 in 5 of us. And then we need to encourage the high school students and college students and those going through health sciences colleges to pursue more mental health careers, mental health professions, so that we can have more psychiatrists, psychologists, and counselors. We don't have enough of them. And we need them because the incidence is growing and is in a 30-year high. And finally, each of us can do something very simple, and I alluded to that, to provide a greater understanding and kindness, to talk about these. You know, you said it's not exactly a cocktail hour conversation. Well, why not? It's incredibly important. If we can talk about what Trump said or what Clinton said, we can talk about a real problem and try to address that problem. There's no reason why we can't talk about it. If you want to, you can go out there and say, Santa Ono tried to kill himself. I don't care. If that is something that will allow you to talk about something and make a difference, then so be it. I don't care. And so with that, thanks each and every one of you for being here tonight. Thank you for what we're doing. This is a great first step. Thank you very much.